Okay, so this is where we left off yesterday. It is February 7th, and gonna go over a few things. Number one, we have our three-dimensional shape. I changed the measurements a bit just so that things would work easily. And I'm using my scroll wheel to zoom in and out, my right mouse button to rotate the view, and holding the scroll wheel to move around. And as I zoom, where I hold my mouse, will determine where I zoom into. So I'm going to create a sketch on this face. So when you create a sketch, you need to have either a plane, which we used yesterday, we used the top plane, or a face. So a face is the side of a three-dimensional shape. So here is the face. I've selected it and I'm going to click sketch. And that allows me to now draw. So remember the letter N on your keyboard. That will allow you to normalize your view. So we're going to use the circle tool, and there's the circle tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my mouse over the origin. So I haven't clicked at all. As I move my mouse up, you can see there's little dotted orange lines and this little symbol. So that symbol is the vertical constraint, and it indicates that where I click will be the center of my circle. It'll be vertically above the origin. So I'm going to click once, move my mouse, click. Now for the measurement, um, we're just going to do zero point 0.5, but we can do whatever. So you'll notice if I click and drag it, I can move it up and down, but I can't move it sideways. So that allows me to constrain the position. Now there's a tool here. This is the point tool. So when I do the point tool, if I hold my mouse over the side, you can see I get an orange line. And when I'm right over the middle, I get this little orange square and the symbol. So this is the midpoint. So if I click there, that point becomes the midpoint of this line. And the letter H on my keyboard, that is my horizontal constraint. So what I can do is I can select this and I can click on the center of my circle and I can click on that point, and that will horizontally constrain my circle. So if you remember from yesterday, when a circle is black, that indicates it's fully constrained. And that means that we've got the dimensions, the size, and we have the position. In this case, vertical from there, horizontal from there. So that's my point. Now I can go right into my extrude. I don't need to close the sketch at all. And I'm just going to show you. So with the sketch right now, it's blind and it's adding. If I select removing, you can see it's removing just a portion of it. And I could type the distance, but what I want to do instead is select through all. And by doing through all, you can see there's the hole on the other side. It puts it through the entire part, green check mark. And the bonus with this is that if I go in and change my dimensions, so let's say it's 6 inches, let's say I'm going to change it to 8 inches. That hole is right there. So if I go back here and instead of through all, let's say blind and I select 8 inches. Now, because that's 8 inches, there's the hole. But if I change that dimension, and so instead of 8, it's now 10, you can see the hole does no longer goes all the way through. And it goes, there's the end, 8 inches away. So that's why using through all is a really powerful tool that allows you to have it go exactly where you want it. So that's the goal with this. So I've got my part now, and what we're going to do, we've learned a bunch of different skills. So now we're going to practice putting those skills to use. So we're going to create a new part studio. So down at the bottom, there's the little plus sign, and we're going to select Create Part Studio. So in the Part Studio, here we are. And what we're going to do is we're going to create the frame. So we're going to create 1x1 aluminum tubing. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a sketch and use the top plane. So again, N to normalize the view. Now, Q will turn on the construction menu, and R turns on the center point rectangle. So we're going to create a center point rectangle of construction lines, and I'll show you what that does. So when you hold your mouse over the origin, click once, move your mouse, click, and this time you can set the size. So we're just going to use 12 inches by 12 inches. So there we go. So construction lines are dotted lines, and you'll notice, I'm just going to create another rectangle here just to show you. You'll notice when you create a rectangle that is solid lines, it's filled in. The fill in indicates that you can extrude it. The dotted lines you can't extrude because it doesn't get filled in because it's just holes. But construction lines are really useful. And what we're going to do is you'll notice in the sketch, there's a little pencil here. I'm just going to change this, and we're going to call this sketch geometry. I like using a sketch to kind of work out the geometry of where everything will go. So green check mark. So now we have a sketch, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a new sketch, and we're going to use the top plane again. Now, what we're going to do is the corner rectangle is the letter G, and I keep mentioning these things because the more you remember the keyboard shortcuts, the faster it goes. If you have to click here, it just takes extra time. So when I hold my mouse over that, because I'm in a separate sketch, I can still refer to that. So there's that point. So I'm going to click, that's going to start the one corner of my rectangle. And when I hold my mouse over here, I get orange. There's my other point. Now, I want to be very careful here because if I change this measurement that's currently selected, I'm going to over constrain it because my distance is already set based on it's got to touch this point in this line. So I don't want to change that. So I'm just holding my mouse over the other one. And now I can type 1, enter, and I'm just going to use escape on my keyboard so that I don't need to enter this dimension. So this is all black because it's fully constrained. This line is 1 inch away. My rectangle starts at that point and it ends on this line, so it knows where everything is. So there's my sketch, and I'm going to name it, so sketch top rail. So this is going to be my top rail, and I can extrude it. I'm just going to jump right into the extrude here. And it's going to be a piece of 1 inch by 1 inch aluminum. So I'm going to just change that to top rail. So it's 1 inch, there we go. So there's my aluminum. Now, when you buy square tube aluminum, and I'm just going to switch. You'll notice I'm using the view cube. I'm going to use the right side. I always try to use top, right, front as my reference points. I try not to use left or bottom or back. So there's the end of that square tube. I'm going to create a sketch, and I'm going to use a strategy. So if I use a construction line, so Q for construction, L for line, I can hold my mouse over the top corner, go to the other corner, and there we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my point tool, and if I create a point right in the middle, you can see it creates my little orange square. There's my midpoint. So I know that's the center, and the center point rectangle is R. So if I hold my mouse there, I can create a rectangle that is centered. And the dimension tool, I can now select that line and that line. And so the dimension tool, remember, is D. And this is 1/8 of an inch thick. So when we buy aluminum tubing, it's typically either 1 inch or 1/16. Sometimes it's in millimeters. So we just put the right thing. So when I'm typing it, I can type 1/8 to get the calculation. I can also type and indicate inches. My units are in inches. If I wanted millimeters, I'd have to either change my units to millimeters or type to indicate millimeters. So there's my thing, and the extrude again. We're going to remove that. And just like we did before, we're going to select through all. So now we've got our square tubing. And in our square tubing, we're going to go back into the sketch for the top rail. And this is why naming things is so helpful. Is as you get more things, it's easier to keep track of things. So that way it's easy for me to keep track of things. Okay, so sketch top rail, I'm going to go back in here and we are going to create a circle. So C for circle. And I'm going to zoom in. Now you'll notice I'm holding my mouse over here, and because I'm at the center of that line, there I get my little orange thing. There's my dotted orange lines. So I can click and create. Now, 13/64. So 1364 inches are what we're going to use. And we're using them because the type of machine screw that we're going to use, that's the perfect size. That's a pretty standard size that we use frequently. So there's my circle. It's blue because it's not fully constrained. I can't move it up and down at all, but I can move it sideways. And so I'm going to constrain it by typing D to get the dimension tool. Click the center, click that line, move my mouse, and want that 1/2 inch. Now, we want a hole every 1/2 inch. And if I go out of this, you can see because I'm drawing it on that initial sketch, it becomes a hole because it's a closed space inside of a closed space. So I could manually do that, but it's obviously going to be a lot of holes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tool, which is called the linear pattern. And if you're on a Chromebook, you can always use the search to find linear pattern because sometimes the tools are hidden under drop downs. So when you select the linear pattern, this is fairly complex. I'm going to click that. Now, the default is that it repeats once upwards and 3 times to the right. So we don't want any upwards, so that's fine. That's perfect. This way, though, we want more than 3. So our item is 12 inches. So now we want it every 1/2 inch, so times 2. And what we'll do is we'll subtract 1. And the reason we'll subtract 1 is because we're already 1/2 an inch out, it will, if we did 12 times 2, which is 24, that last one would be halfway on this line. So we're going to just subtract 1. And we're going to hit enter. Now, this number right here, that's how far apart are we going to separate them. And we're going to go 1/2 inch, 0.5. And once we've typed those in, we can click and that will create a pattern in here. So in a sketch, you can create a linear pattern and we're just going to click a green check mark. And there is our linear pattern and all the holes are all the way through. I'm just going to pop into here. Whoops. Okay, so the reason I wanted to pop into here is because in a sketch you can do a linear pattern, but you can also do a linear pattern in the Part Studio. So when I do a linear pattern in the Part Studio, I've got some options, and one of them is the feature pattern. And an extrude is a feature, so I can pattern it. So I can select that extrude, and I can select a direction. I'm just going to select that line, and I'm going to center it. And then I can pick how many times I want it. That's too many times, so I'll go 6 times, maybe 5 times. There we go. It won't allow me if it's going too many. And just like that, I've got a pattern. These are spaced 1 inch. If I did 0.5, well, now they're touching, so it can't do that. So that's why you get it in red. So I might need to separate it a bit more. So you can see you can do patterns in here as well as in the sketch. And there's reasons you would do in different areas. We'll cover that later, but know that if you're going to be doing something that's very repetitive, check to see if there's a tool that can allow you to do it. So we're going to finish up. Over on the bottom here is the part. We're going to right click that part and go to properties. So when you're creating properties, you want to name your part. So you want to pick a logical name. Now, top rail for you might not be logical, but for a drivetrain, that's often a common term that we use. And part number. So we have a pattern for part numbers. So basically, the pattern is your initials. So I like sticking with McT um, for my initials. And then what the project is. So we're going to just call this February because it's project that we started in February. And so, for example, our robotics team, 4152 is what we always start because that's our team number. And then 23 indicates that that's the robot for the 2023 competition season. So, if we're doing some other special project, we'll give it another name. So the next part is the letter. When it's an individual part like this, then it's the letter P. If it's an assembly, it's the letter A. Then you have four numbers. So the first number, 01, that represents the subassembly. And we'll go over those later on. So for now, just 01. And then the last thing is another number, 01. So this is our first part, so it's 01. If we make a second part, it will become 02. And the third part, 03, and everything. That way, if I have a drawing for something and I've got the part number, I can identify who it is, McT, what project they were working on, whether it's a part or an assembly, which subassembly of their thing. And in like for a robot, we might have a subassembly for the drivetrain, we might have a subassembly for an intake, a subassembly for a serializer. So that's, we number them all, and then an individual number so that if I am making these parts, I can easily have a spreadsheet and keep track of each individual item, and they've got a unique number because sometimes you'll have names that are very similar. So having a unique part number is really crucial. I can also click this and assign a material. And when I assign a material, on Shape Material Library, I can type aluminum, and there's aluminum, green check mark. The benefit of doing this is now I can click this display mass properties and I can see exactly how much this item weighs. Um, so that allows me to get information about what I'm doing. So that is everything for today. A lot of stuff that we covered. It's really important to practice it.